Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Black, editor in chief at InsideHPC. And today, on behalf of HPC industry analyst firm Hyperion Research, we're talking with Manish Parashar. He is director of the Office of Advanced Cyberinfrastructure at the National Science Foundation in Washington. In December in Washington, Manish gave a presentation at a Hyperion event on how the NSF is implementing the CHIPS and Science Act, and also why leading edge HPC tools are critical to supporting and advancing science. So Manish is going to talk about some highlights from his presentation, and then we'll have a little Q&A afterwards. So Manish, great to be with you, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure chatting with you. As you mentioned, during my talk in December at the event, I talked about two things. I talked about how NSF is implementing the CHIPS and Science Act, and then why HPC leading edge tools are important to support and advance science and are really central to many aspects of the CHIPS and Science Act. So what I'll do now is very quickly go through some of the highlights in my presentation, and then I look forward to chatting with you.
Okay, great.
Let me start by giving a background on NSF. NSF's mission is to promote the progress of science, to advance national health and prosperity and welfare, and secure the national defense. And it does this by investing in all areas of science and engineering, research and education through its many directorates and offices, as you see here on this slide. One way to look at the way NSF does this is by the numbers. And these are some numbers from FY21-22. In FY22, NSF had a budget of $8.8 billion. And I'll highlight some of the numbers on this slide. The first number is 93%. That is the amount of this total budget that goes back into the research and education community in the form of funding and grants. Right. The other number is the number of people it supports, over 300,000. And many of these are students, early career researchers, and researchers from minority and underrepresented groups. And so this is having a huge impact. Another number here is the number 181 million, which is how much NSF invests in seeding public-private partnerships. So overall, it gives you an idea of the tremendous impact that NSF has. But I also like to highlight that we are in a defining moment right now, and that is through the confluence of a number of factors, including global computation, realizing that there is this missing millions. There's a huge number of researchers across our country who don't have all the opportunities to contribute to this research and innovation ecosystem, and the level of support we are getting, bipartisan support from Congress, right? And a lot of these aspects are highlighted in the Vision 2030 report that was put together by the National Science Board. So in response to this defining moment, what NSF has done, and this is the first time it's done this in over about 30 years, is to create a new directorate that aligns and better responds to this new opportunities that we see. And this is this new horizontal, the Directorate on Technology, Innovation, and Partnership, that's focused on taking a lot of the foundational and use-inspired research and the results from this research that's coming out and translate them to have broader impact across science and society in the US. The TIP Directorate, as shown on the slide, is a horizontal. It cuts across all the existing offices and directorates at NSF and partners with them to advance NSF's mission and to have a national impact across the US. In terms of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2020, here are some of the highlights and that you probably already are familiar with. It appropriates about $54 billion for semiconductor investments, R&D, workforce development, and it authorizes NSF, DOE, NIST, and NASA as part of this. In terms of NSF, it authorizes $81 billion. That's $36 billion over for the agency, and a large part of that really goes into the TIP Directorate and helping move its mission forward the mission of this directorate forward. And this is through its NSF engines, the enterprise entrepreneurial fellowship program, and other activities that CHIP is leading. I'd like to highlight one point here, right? In terms of the Chips and Science Act, it's really is a historical moment to advance curiosity-driven exploratory research and use-inspired translational research. And it does this through a bunch of different things. But one thing I'd like to note is that cyber infrastructure is really critical to advancing all these things. For example, Chips and Science supports early stage research that will create revolutionary new ideas in areas such as food energy systems, sustainable chemistry, risks and resilience, clean water systems, behavioral health, critical minerals, precision agriculture, and so on. And again, in all these areas, cyber infrastructure is critical, and HPC broadly is very critical to these areas. Um, just a quick slide about the regional innovation. This is a new program that was set up by the TIP Directorate, and it's really looking to cultivate new regional innovation ecosystems throughout the US that can address major scientific and technological goals, solving societal challenges, right? And the goal here is to balance technical and geographic innovation, right? So to create engines that are set up regionally that leverage regional expertise, that create and address problems that are regionally important, and then they translate the results of that research to impact and to advance regional uh, issues. And so it's really a really novel way of being able to have broad impact. And TIP and NSF ran an initial competition, and this slide just talks about what the response has been. It has been an overwhelming response from every state, every territory in the US. And more importantly, all the responses are accessible through the TIPS website. So you can see what are the response. And the goal here is to then incentivize, facilitate partnership across these responses. TIP also is working on behalf of NSF to promote high-tech workforce development and to advance different partnerships with industry. And here are two examples that you see with Intel and with Micron. Switching now to HPC and the importance of HPC, I'll give you a quick background about the Office of Advanced Cyberinfrastructure. Like TIP, this is another horizontal in NSF. That means it cuts across all the directorates and offices in NSF and partners with them to advance and transform science and engineering research and education by investing in research cyber infrastructure as well as research in cyber infrastructure. We look at cyber infrastructure broadly. It includes HPC and the large computing, but also includes aspects of data infrastructure, networking, software tools, pilot test beds, services, and I think most importantly, the expertise and the people that really make this cyber infrastructure work. And increasingly, we are focused on making sure that these different pieces come together towards helping advance NSF's mission, helping enable the discoveries and the innovations that we're looking to. The other aspect I'd like to highlight here is things are changing quickly, and I know your audience knows this very well in terms of technology, but also in terms of science and engineering research needs, and the cyber infrastructure must evolve, and we have been working by design to make sure that these aspects are possible. In fact, we have a vision document and blueprints that builds on a few overarching principles to make sure that this cyber infrastructure is able to evolve and meet the changing needs of science, right? This includes, as I mentioned, looking at cyber infrastructure holistically, supporting translational research, balancing innovation with stability, and making sure that we couple innovation cycle and address equity and usability as first-class design principles. And the reason we do this is to enable science and innovation, right? And here are just some of the examples of the impact the NSF cyber infrastructure has, whether it is imaging the black hole event horizon in our galaxy, the Sagittarius A star, or modeling how the Delta virus propagates in respiratory aerosols, or understanding how the local hydration from supercell thunderstorms, understanding how supply chains and modeling supply chains so that we don't have these black swan events like we recently experienced, or really building core services that can address important cybersecurity problems like what Zeek does for intrusion detection, right? These are just a few examples of the impact cyber infrastructure is having. We have a really broad and diverse cyber infrastructure ecosystem that we have supported. This includes leadership class computing systems, such as what I'll talk about in the next slide, but also includes large capacity systems, test beds focused on, for example, AI or large data intensive computing, networking test beds, software services, coordination services, cloud services. So this is a huge and diverse ecosystem that can meet the broad needs of our user community. As I mentioned, the leadership class computing facility, this is the current investment on making sure that we have computing that can enable applications and science that are not possible otherwise, right? And like NSF does for its other facilities, the telescopes and the large observatories, NSF is treating this large computing as a facility as well, right? As a long term, large investment that can support science. And it looks at it as a um, built on a nexus of a computational capability with the required software and services and with the required partnerships to make sure it can impact, and also has an integrated educational and outreach plan. Architecturally, it's viewed as a distributed facility that is led by the Texas Advanced Computing Center, but also has 5 distributed sites that collectively form this facility. Um, it also partners with a large number of other institutions, including over 80 HPCUs, TCUs, and HSIs, to make sure it's not only it can be very broadly used by all the researchers in the country. It also has technology partnerships with Dell as well as Switch. Right. As I mentioned, it's a distributed site. It's made up of 5 distributed science centers that bring different capabilities to this facility so that it can have the broadest impact on the science and meet the broadest needs. And finally, the system itself is expected to be about 400 petaflops and provides a whole bunch of different core capabilities in terms of computing and storage. And finally, it'll be housed in a data center in a colo facility operated by Switch. So, given that background, I think one thing I'd like to close with is that while it's good to have all these capabilities, it's also important that every American, every researcher across the country can benefit from these resources. So it's really, really important to democratize access to cyber infrastructure, and through this, democratize the ability to contribute to science. And as we all know, there are a bunch of different barriers in doing this, right? And so NSF is really focused on making sure we can provide broad, fair, and equitable access to its infrastructure. And so we are trying to see how do we build a cyber infrastructure ecosystem that's truly available to all, right? And we do this by not only creating the infrastructure that meets a broad set of needs, but creating the support networks, services, expertise, training that can make sure that everybody has the required resources and training and ability to benefit from these investments. And just in closing, I want to point out that this is not just NSF. This is a part of a larger national vision. And here you see some of the other dimensions of this mission, whether it's the Future Advanced Computing Ecosystem, which is an NSTC subcommittee. It's a National AI resource that just released their final report, which is an implementation plan in January. Subcommittee on Open Science, which is looking at how do we create broad and open and equitable access to the results from all of science, including the data and the software. And finally, the National Discovery Cloud, which is really advancing the technical foundation of research so that everybody can contribute to it. Right. So these are just some examples of, like NSF, how the entire nation is moving towards this vision of a national research ecosystem that's accessible by everybody. Let me stop there and open it up for questions. Back to you, Doug.
Okay, that was great, Manish. Really interesting. I'm really fascinated by this leadership class computing facility, but the whole vision behind it, and it reminds me of DOE's future-looking supercomputing leadership class strategy, where they say they're moving away from monolithic systems and more toward modular, but also connected and networked. Um, and that whole notion, it seems also very present in what you're talking to, where you really are fostering collaboration, teamwork, which in my life experience, that's really where you get the best work done.
You're absolutely right, Doug. Right. So I do view what NSF is doing as very complementary to many of the investments DOE has made um, in exascale. Right. The Our architecture is driven by the broad nature of the NSF research community. Uh, NSF supports research in all areas of science and engineering, and the researchers that we support have very different needs, but also have different ways they want to access the computing,
Hmm.
which is why we have architected this in this way, right? So we have different entry points that present this broader capability, which has computing and data and software in a way that's most effective for that community, right? And just to go back to your idea of our partnerships with DOE, a lot of the expertise and insights into designing this came in our partnership with DOE. In fact, we have members from the DOE Exascale community that are part of our advisory committees that have talked about their experiences and their um, technologies so that we can benefit from that. So it's really a partnership, and really together these systems can provide a very unique capability for the nation.
Yeah, that old aphorism, or I forget who originally made this comment, but the network is the system, the network is the computer. That seems to be very much in play here with what you're talking about. Um, but the other thing too is, as we all know, the demographics of the HPC community are getting older, and it's very male, and there's a universal support for more diversity. So I was really pleased to see the training aspect of this whole strategy that you're talking about, bringing younger people in to the community, bringing and more diverse uh, people as well.
You're absolutely right. I think we have to be very conscious of that, because we need to make sure we just don't build the most powerful systems, we also make them the most accessible systems that are out there. And that means taking the extra step to building the right interfaces, right? And knowing that they could be different. But I think you touched on the most important point, and that's the training. Make sure that you provide the training at the level needed, and related to that is also have the expertise where that are embedded in the community that can help understand what the local needs are, what the local barriers are, address them, and bring that research community to these tremendous resources, right? Because everybody should have the opportunity to benefit from these resources and contribute to a national science, engineering, research ecosystem.
I guess my last question would be around the Horizon system that Dell is building. Um, do we have a time frame for that, when that system is expected to be delivered and go online?
Absolutely. This, as we said, we did this LCCF leadership class computing facility differently from the prior ways that NSF has done this. We did it as part of our MREFC program, which funds all our other large facilities, right? The large ships, telescopes, right? So anything that our research, large-scale research instruments, how do we support them? And this process has a well-defined life cycle. We currently are in the final design stage, and so we are going to the FDR, final design review, soon. Um, Also, last summer, the National Science Board authorized the director of NSF to include the LCCF in a future budget request, right? So what happens from here is that this is included in a budget request, and when it gets appropriated, then we can start construction and operation of this facility. Our tentative timeline is to have that in the 25 in the FY 26-27 timeframe.
Okay, very exciting. Um, Manish, thanks so much for your time today. We've been with Manish Parashar of the National Science Foundation. Thanks again.
Thank you, Doug. It's been a pleasure.